Hello and happy holiday season and Merry Christmas to you if you are tuning into this episode close to its release date, or just, like a regular hello if you're tuning in on like January or whenever. This is Auspol Explained. I'm your curly haired host, David. Speaking of Christmas, this episode is going to be all about the second shortest serving Prime Minister in Australian history, Sir Earle Christmas Grafton Page. See what I did there? It helps the SEO. Yes, it's my favourite holiday tradition, shoehorning Australian politics into every conversation I have, which to be fair is what I do normally, only this time I have a little mug that says, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas." It's empty, this is a prop. So, who was Earle Page? He was the 11th Prime Minister of Australia who served from the 7th of April of 1939 all the way to the 26th of April of 1939. But that's not the most interesting thing about him. His decisions and actions have had a profound influence on Australian politics over the past 100 years. So I'll tell you a little bit about, who he was and how he shaped Australian history. First off, how short is the second shortest? 19 days. He was Prime Minister for only 19 days. Or 20, depending on how you count it. Personally, I think 19 sounds more interesting and accurate, but the National Archives of Australia disagrees and says 20. But who are you going to side with? Huh? Who? Pick a side. Choose right now. Pick me. Pick me. The person who served the least amount of time as Prime Minister was Frank Ford, who served for only 1 week. If you want to know more about him, I have an episode all about him. You can find that link in the description. But back to Earle Page. Why is he called Sir Earle Christmas Grafton Page? He was born in 1880 in the town of Grafton, New South Wales. Yes, one of his middle names is actually his town of birth, which is quite literal. He was named after it. That would be like if my middle name was Perth, which would be weird, but at least I wouldn't have to change my initials. Fun fact, the town of Grafton is named after the Duke of Grafton, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1768 to 1770. No relation as far as I'm aware, but now you can be like, oh, that's where that name comes from. Which is basically 50% of the reason why I learn history. It makes looking at street signs way more interesting. Conversations with me on long car rides are very engaging, and everyone loves them. His other middle name, Christmas, comes from the surname of a childless female relative. She asked the Page family, "Hey, could you give this name to one of your children so it could be carried on for me?" And they went, "Yes." Cool story. Fast forward to 13th of December 1919. His political career begins. He was elected to the division of Cowper as a farmers and settlers candidate. This was one of the many state-based country parties that had been forming around that period. This quickly led to those groups uniting and the formation of the Country Party on a federal level, which Earle Page had a significant hand in founding. William McWilliams, though, was the Country Party's first federal leader, but the party room quickly decided that his name was just too silly and repetitive and he had to go. That, and he also had voted against the rest of his own party. Earle Page was then chosen to take over as leader in 1921. The Country Party initially was not aligned with either the government or the opposition. In fact, it was actually really critical of the then Prime Minister Billy Hughes, who led the Nationalist Party. But then everything changes, because in 1922 there was an election and no one won. Neither the Nationalist Party or Labour had enough seats by themselves to form government. But the Country Party had 14 seats in the House of Representatives, meaning that they had the balance of power. They could choose which party to support, and therefore who would form government, and who would be the next Prime Minister. Billy Hughes of the Nationalist Party, or Matthew Charlton of Labour. Earle Page chose neither. He went to the Nationalist Party and went, "Hey, we'll support you and form a little coalition, but just one tiny condition. Get rid of Billy Hughes. I don't like him, get rid of him. Replace him with Stanley Bruce. And They did. Earle Page managed to initiate a leadership spill while not even being part of the Nationalist Party. Hark, the Sydney Morning Herald sings, "A new coalition is born today." In fact, this is the coalition. Even though the names are different, this is its origin story. The past 100 years of Australian politics has been shaped by the demands of Page during these negotiations for support. Basically, from the start, he set up the tradition in the coalition that positions in the cabinet are shared amongst the parties, with 5 out of 11 cabinet positions going to Country Party members in 1922. Page also became the treasurer and second highest ranking member in the cabinet. We see this continue today. The Country Party was renamed the National Country Party in 1975, and then the National Party of Australia in 1982. And since 2003, it has been known as the Nationals. Yes, the Nationals, the party from the country. The Nationalists, on the other hand, would go on to be absorbed into the United Australia Party when it formed in 1931. The UAP then dissolved in 1945, and its members formed the Liberal Party that we know today. Now, the Liberal Party, as the larger of the two main coalition partners, when they're in government federally, their leader is the Prime Minister. The leader of the Nationals is then the Deputy Prime Minister instead of the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. They then share the cabinet portfolios collectively despite technically being two separate parties. Except in Queensland, where the Liberal National Party is just one party, where the two just sort of kissed so hard that their lips fused, and now they speak in perfect unison. Also, if anyone from the Country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory gets elected, they too are part of the coalition. Never forget the Northern Territory. My wife was born there, but wait, I just said that the Nationals leader, or the leader of the Country Party, is only the deputy in this arrangement. So how did Earle Page become Prime Minister? The answer, April 7th, 1939, Joseph Lyons dies. No Australian Prime Minister had died in office before. It was a bit of a shock. Joseph Lyons was a religious man who loved Jesus so much that he died on Good Friday of a heart attack. 3 days later, unlike Jesus, he was still dead. But it was time to begin funeral services and also consider who was going to be the next Prime Minister. Now, technically, the position of Deputy Prime Minister wasn't a title, it wasn't like an official position that existed until 1968, just that Page was considered equivalent to a Deputy Prime Minister, as he was second in charge. The Governor-General then appointed Earle Page to be the Prime Minister as a caretaker government, until the United Australia Party could choose a new leader. He then became the first Country Party member to ever become Prime Minister, not like acting Prime Minister like what happens when the Prime Minister goes on a holiday, but actually the Prime Minister. Still, there was very much the idea that the larger party of the coalition just needed to find a new leader and Page would step down. Page, the UAP, and Labour all had different ideas of what would happen next. Seeing an opportunity to take power away from the United Australia Party, John Curtin, leader of the Labour Party, told Page at Joseph Lyons' own funeral that he'd support Page's government for the next 18 months left in Parliament, so long as they didn't introduce a bill on conscription. The coalition could have become the Country Party and the Labour Party, not the UAP or eventually the Liberals. Imagine how that would have changed Australian history. Curtin was like, come on, I've got the red, you've got the green, that's basically Christmas colours, join us. Join us. Page, on the other hand, had different plans. He contacted his good friend and former Prime Minister, Stanley Bruce. Bruce was travelling. He wasn't in Australia, but he was considering coming back if need be. The two are good friends, like genuinely good friends. Stanley would end up being the best man at Page's second wedding 20 years after this event. Page liked him so much he offered to resign from his seat from Parliament so he could run in the by-election for the seat, get re-elected, re-enter Parliament and become Prime Minister again. Because that is what bros do for bros. They lift each other up, you know, they support them. The UAP is considering a different option, Robert Menzies. The problem here is that Page hates Robert Menzies. He outright says that he'll refuse to be in a coalition with that guy if the UAP chose him to be the leader. So what happens? April 26th, 1939, the UAP chooses Robert Menzies to be their leader. Earle Page is not happy. He hates that guy. He refuses to be in a coalition with him. The coalition splits, so the Country Party loses all of its ministerial positions. On top of this, Page accuses Menzies of being a coward by not enlisting in World War I, and even said that his disloyalty to Joseph Lyons hastened his death. What? The Country Party was like, hey man, that's bullying. No, we don't bully the Prime Minister like that. We do it in different ways. The Country Party forced Page to stand down, and he was replaced by Archie Cameron as leader. Cameron didn't hate Menzies, so by March of 1940, the Country Party and the UAP had reconciled and the coalition reformed. They hadn't yet kissed and fused the lips like in Queensland, but they're at least back to holding hands. Page's attacks on Menzies didn't cost him everything though. He would eventually be given the position of Minister for Health under Menzies in 1949, but he'd been deliberately given less responsibility and influence than he did in previous governments. Minister for Health was a pretty fitting appointment. Before entering politics, he was a doctor and opened a private hospital. He also was a surgeon during World War I. Page continued on in Parliament until losing the 1961 election in December, shortly before he died. He'd won 16 general elections in a row and is the third longest serving member of the Australian Federal Parliament at 41 years, 362 days. Fun fact, there is a term for the longest currently serving member of a parliament. If they are a man, then that is Father of the House or Father of the Parliament, which Earle Page was between 1952 and 1961. I hope just once someone in his presence made the joke of calling him Father Christmas. Pew pew! Yes, another bad Christmas joke in the basket just before the end of the episode. He had entered Parliament in December of 1919 and left in December of 1961, a very festive bookend to the lengthy and interesting career of Sir Earle Christmas Grafton Page. And just to give you another one of those, oh yeah, that's why it's called that kind of moments, the Federal Division of Page was created in 1984 in honour of Earle Page. And much like how Grafton is contained within the middle of Earle Page's name, the town of Grafton is also contained within the Division of Page. You know, Australian political history. It's like an onion. There are layers. And there you have it. Not only does he have an interesting seasonal middle name, but he was a key person in the creation of the coalition which has shaped the landscape and election results of Australian politics for the past 100 years and counting. Even though his time as Prime Minister was short, his legacy is long-lasting. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this, share with someone else, subscribe, all those sorts of things. Thank you so much to those who support me on Patreon, like me on Facebook, and if you'd like to learn more about Earle Page, there is a copy of the script with citations in the description as well. Have a wonderful new year, and we'll see you next time.